Thank you to GrassRoots. Thank you for joining us today. This is the Aspen City Council work session for June 27, 2022. On a very special Monday with the Colorado Avalanche having won the Stanley Cup yesterday. This is our first time getting together since that Colorado event. Congratulations to them and us. We have two items on our agenda tonight, the 2022 financial update and 2023 budget assumptions. And then we have our Compass strategic planning framework. We're going to start off with item one, the financial update. So Pete Strecker is here to introduce this item.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Okay to share my screen?
Please do.
Well, it's a lovely shade of green.
Wonderful. On brand.
Well, thanks for having me tonight. I'm here just to share kind of some updates on the revenues and how things are ticking into the city coffers. And then we'll transition a little bit into a couple of input items for the council to kind of make sure that we're on the same page and how we set next year's budget process going forward. So let me get to one. So year to date through April, we always lag at least a month in terms of our collections just due to the filing timing for each individual business. But we are pacing 56% ahead of 2021 year to date. That sounds like an astronomical amount of growth. But if you look at the top of that chart, you can see that the two industries, which are really our two big pillars, accommodations and restaurants, are basically double what they were a year ago through this period. That is because January and February of 2021 was very soft. So we were coming out of red level restrictions at that time, and tourism was just really muted. So a lot of the growth is really just somewhat normalizing a tourist year, but also the aspect that we had some very high daily room rates as well. So,
you know, and interesting because that's through April, so that ski season, you know, we're now seeing a June that conversations that I'm having have definitely slowed down a tick from last year, and most people's kind of anecdotal information. So while that's positive news in a lot of ways, yeah, I think it's tempered with a lot of explanation as well.
You should be running these slides, Mr. Mayor. We have a little bit of headwind, I think, on the horizon here. We have some real challenges with fuel prices as a tourist industry, as well as staffing shortages and kind of that hospitality sector that are really going to be pushing hard against kind of that continued robust kind of environment. So, you know, looking at employment, our unemployment rate is kind of where it trended back down multiple years ago. We're actually even just a tick higher than where it was back in 2017, 2018, 2019. But that is still very few individuals really seeking employment up here for the entirety of Pickens County. So there's really a lot of challenges with trying to fill spaces.
Yeah. I've always heard that at some, please, I have it on. Thank you. I'd always heard that there's some point below 5%, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4, where they say you're kind of reaching unemployable levels of folks who are handicapped or disabled or something, but it's not as if you ever really get to zero.
That's correct. And like you said, I think 5% roughly is like truly kind of that benchmark of what full employment is typically kind of considered. So, very good. And as I mentioned, fuel prices are definitely strong. I actually just updated this slide for today. That Pickens County actually ticked up to over $6 a gallon. The national average actually went down since when I published the slides till today by a little bit. So, you know, we're still feeling a pretty significant push and crunch from this individual metric, and it's double what it was a year ago. So it's really, you experience it on the bus rides coming into town, they are packed. And then, you know, going through some traffic woes, people are avoiding driving in, but I think there's still plenty of vehicles kind of making transit around the community difficult. So I will say that I use the words losing ground. That's probably a little bit unfair, considering that we're at 56% year-to-date up over last year. But where we started in January was about 90% up year-to-date, through 1 month. So we are trending, where we're not maintaining this super high level of growth month over month as we continue through the calendar year, because January and February were really just so soft a year ago. With that aspect, right now, my best guess is that we may be as positive as 12% up by end of the year. That's still a lot of growth, and it's growth off of a very strong 2021. For the rest of the year, it was a phenomenal year. So that's up a lot, but it's not a 56% growth for the year by any means. And there's, like we said, there's still a lot of headwinds kind of pushing back. So we just have to, temper expectations a little bit and see how things progress.
Pete, I know it would be hard to count for changes in lodging prices and stuff, but is there any way to tell how we're doing compared to 2020?
Yeah, I mean, I've taken actually a look at 2019, because that was really the real
first full year. Last full year.
And the thing is you have to make then the assumption of how much would be a normal annual growth, and that you can kind of put in 5% or so on an annual basis. So that's 5, 10, 15% just for that alone on growth. I'd have to go back and really look at where this would.
Yeah, and I don't want to create extra work. I was just kind of wondering if there was a better comparison year.
Yeah, no, and in fact, actually, when I'm doing my projections, I'm usually looking at that last real good year as kind of my basis to kind of get a metric on cash flows and how we're trending on those, and each individual industry that we look at in the total economy. So I'm kind of doing all of that. On the lodging tax side, obviously, because we had some really soft months that we're comparing to, it's already not surprising that we're, it's just this substantial jump between 21 and 22. But really that trend line that you can see on the slide right now really demonstrates how we're even well above that particular metric or benchmark. So, I think the aspect of, our occupancy numbers have kind of returned, but our prices have actually just really jumped well above what we were kind of trending on a year-over-year basis. And it has really driven into some significant revenues at this point.
Yeah, I wonder, I suppose I should be asking this of people in the lodging sector, but I'm wondering if those average daily rates are going to come down by demand, because the occupancy rates are the same 2019, but it's a $218 a night increase in the average rack rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would imagine dynamic pricing can always play in. Obviously, like you said, though, the occupancy numbers are the same for those 3 years apart, but you had that much price growth. So it depends on what the appetite is for the average tourist, I guess, and how important is it to be in Aspen.
I'm not a cannibal. Appetite.
So,
Eat your own.
in terms of the real estate transfer taxes, obviously we are in another year of just historic growth right now. Some of this, though, is really one-time large events that I noted there on the first 2 bullet points, where we had sales that happened in 4 months of when it first turned over once to turn over again, and a $30 million profit on that particular deal.
Yeah.
Or, something that took a few years but had a 7-fold increase. Some of these things are kind of anomalies, and that's what always makes real estate transfer taxes so hard to peg. What I've been kind of alluding to in all of my past presentations is that inventory sometimes has to come into play and really start to play out in the future numbers. And our inventory is super low. So with that, I kind of say how much longer do we have until, the roller coaster kind of bends back down. And you can see the last two big drops we had were almost 40% each time when they occurred. So there's certainly the possibility that that's where we could be heading next. So kind of with that in context, tonight we wanted to bring up the process of 2023's planning. The city already has jumped into capital planning. We do that with our departments early at this point, and we are trying to solidify those plans to kind of look at what we need for 2023, but also on the horizon for the next 10 years, make sure we don't have any structural problems with our funds. And then what we'll talk about tonight is some of this continuation base budgeting items. So, what does it just take to do what we're doing day in, day out at the current service levels and things of that nature. And then when we, bring the budget back to you, we'll also have all those supplementals, which are really those, nice to haves, new initiatives, mandates, things of that nature. So with this second bullet point, just really talking a little bit about the base budget. There's two components we really want to discuss. One is on the labor side, and the other is on goods and services. So on goods and services, one thing I wanted to really highlight was the aspect of inflation. And everybody's seeing this in the news all the time. This graphic here really kind of gives you a visual demonstration of how inflation kind of moves each month. And how the weighting of each different type of purchase. So shelter makes up the biggest of all the costs in the inflation picture, about a third of the total pie. All of the things that you buy that are tangible except for energy and food is the next biggest slice. So that can be anything from apparel, or it could be auto parts, or it could be whatever. And then energy and food are those next two big slices. And then all the personal services or other things that you buy are those smaller slices. As a city, we really do mitigate for some of these things when we do things like building for affordable housing. That takes some of that shelter pressure off. Same thing with transit services, which isn't as big of a slice, but the no fare service and things like that. But some of the things are still very unavoidable. Things like energy, food, and the commodities items are really just passed on as they kind of ship into our community.
Just so I understand this pie chart, are these the areas you're saying that the city spends money on, which are now seeing inflation? Are you saying that these are the areas that comprise the inflation index? And is this Colorado, national, or localized?
So it's the second question, answer to your second question is yes, this is what comprises how inflation is calculated on a national basis. I have not tailored the weightings to a Colorado specific or even a Pickens County specific kind of weighting, because like I said.
Oh, sure. I understand why. I just want to.
Yep.
And then
No.
Are we also, the last question would be, then is this saying that shelter has gone up 33% or shelter is 33% of the weighting?
Correct, 33% of the weighting of CPI.
Thank you.
Very good. So yes, with that in mind, obviously the city has to mitigate for some of inflation basically in our own budget, and that's really on that food, a little bit on the food side, but more on the energy and the commodity side and some of the services sides, right? So it's just something to be mindful of, that we're fighting this just like the everyday individual within our community. And you've always seen the headline number these days, that 8.6% in yellow is the latest headline number at end of May. And you can again see these different sectors and how they weigh into that movement of the 8.6%. So energy moved up 34% year over year, basically. So that's a big driver of that 8.8%. But energy only made up a portion of the total weighting of CPI. So some of its 34% was muted by the fact that it's not as big of the total piece of the pie.
Just to clarify, so the reason we are having our proposed as a 4.0 when the headline is 8.6 is because in the makeup of things that we spend on, a significant portion of those are lesser drivers of that headline number.
That's a good cross correlation. Very good. Some of these things we don't have to necessarily compete for as an organization. Obviously, some individuals throughout our community might have to deal with some other pieces that we don't have to. In addition, the reason for maybe not going to 8% is the aspect, again, that we were talking about those headwinds earlier on, that we may have a little bit of a pushback, and some of these prices might start to come down a little bit as demand maybe starts to get dampened a bit.
Yeah. You know, I would just say if these are all national averages, it's hard to imagine that other than being in an APTA-controlled unit, that the housing prices have only gone up 5.5%. I mean, I know too many anecdotes
They made
from people who've lost their
105.5%.
leases and what the new people are signing to think it's only gone up 5%.
Absolutely, 100%. And then just on that left-hand side of the screen, I did try to just denote that in the past, we've seen on average inflation going up a little over 4% over the last 3 years, whereas the city has actually done less than 2% in its base budget growth. We even had, the year of cuts, obviously, but otherwise, we've only gone up to about 2% on our given year. So for 2023, we are trying to make a bit of a nod as our recommendation, saying it's still high. 8% is high, and we probably need to maybe move a little bit off of that 2% that we've typically gone for. But we don't want to go too high, because just knowing that there may be a little bit of a pause coming up. Questions on that? So the other aspect was talking about labor. And do I have somebody here? I do. I have two great resources here to maybe help navigate through some of these slides on some of our labor assumptions going into 2023.
Hello.
Hi, Courtney. Hi, Alyssa.
Right?
Welcome.
Good evening, good afternoon.
Yeah.
So thanks, Pete, that was a good lead-in. Just to reintroduce myself, I'm Courtney DeVito, the HR Director, and we are here this evening, or this afternoon, sorry, to talk a little bit about assumptions for next year and what 2023 may look like for our total compensation within the city of Aspen. So one thing to point out is just about a year ago, actually, almost exactly a year ago, we came to you last June, excuse me, to talk about approval of our total compensation philosophy and what that really looks like. And that was part of our overall compensation and classification study that we did last year. So with that, we've been able to put a framework in place that allows us to remain competitive with who we hire, how we hire, and what we're offering to our staff. And that's really important to help retain folks in our workforce and find folks for our workforce as well. And so our total compensation philosophy envelops everything from base pay to wellness benefits to health insurance to career development and more. And so that's what's driving our entire philosophy. Next slide. Thank you. So you can see here in the circle, there's a number of things that I just mentioned. So our employee benefits, pay transparency, growth opportunities, culture, and pay. So those are some of the items in the wheel that allow us to remain competitive. And so when looking at total compensation, we're taking all of those factors and figuring out how we, as the city of Aspen, can remain market leading. And market leading is something that we look at in terms of just here in our valley, but we also take into account that we are attracting a workforce that isn't just from here. We are looking nationally and regionally in all of our searches, when that is appropriate, of course. So sometimes we hire local candidates, and sometimes we obviously find folks from further away. So we are always trying to remain and be competitive yet creative in what we can offer to staff. So we do this very intentionally, obviously, to make sure that we can maintain the workforce that we have. The other thing that we look at too with total compensation, if you remember, we were just here a few months ago discussing our new compensation plan. So we are always looking at that to see where we fall within the market. And while that was just put into place 2 months ago, we are continually looking at market data, what's happening around here, what's happening in our area, in order to make sure that when we are recruiting and retaining our workforce, that we are offering competitive pay. So we have a number of items that we'll talk a little bit about tonight that we've talked to you about previously, probably about the same time last year. But what we're looking and planning for 2023, first and most importantly to a lot of our staff is obviously health insurance premiums. In 2022, we did not see an increase in our premiums to our staff, and that was very welcoming to our staff and to new employees as well. We were also able to zero out the employee-only portion of premiums in 2022, and we would like to recommend that moving forward. So if you were just one person on the plan, you have a $0 premium per month, but as you add dependents, there is a premium that goes into that. But each employee on our plan does not pay an additional premium. It's just when you add folks onto the plan.
If I may add to that, for the health insurance employee premiums, we're looking at, again, that TCP, total compensation philosophy, as our foundation. So we look at being competitive. This is a strategy that we're using for our employees. We have a healthy fund balance. This is sustainable, and we made substantial plan design changes to ensure that it's sustainable. Thanks.
Courtney, just for clarification, does that mean that a full-time equivalent employee of the city of Aspen pays nothing for health insurance?
Just in the premium, correct. So if I were just myself on my insurance plan, I have a $0 monthly premium. But if I have dependents on the plan, I would pay their premium.
And how does that compare to other municipalities and other free market private sector?
It depends on where you're looking, but more locally, we are very competitive.
Very competitive, meaning well below or?
In line with what a lot of the other larger employers in the area are doing with zeroing out the employee premium portion. And then if you take the other larger employers in our area, our cost is fairly competitive as well.
When you say plan design changes, did they affect the deductible or the co-pays that the employees will pay?
No, and that was last year. The plan design changes for last year were focused on prescription utilization, and we were balancing out for equity purposes between what the specific group, it was our grandfather retirees, and their benefit with the rest of our employees.
No. Okay, I was just wondering, it was an important component that I used up all last year. And you know, the copay still, you end up, you know, for my year was close to $6,000 out of pocket.
Right.
And so I'm glad to see there's no premium to have $6,000 out of pocket. Thank you.
So, moving on to merit increases. So historically, we've always done a 4% on average merit increase, so up to 4%. And a merit increase comes to our employees on their year anniversary, so from the date that they started their job. And depending upon job performance, our average review score is about 3.7%, but obviously can go higher, up to 4%, and we would like to continue that for 2023. And that's keeping in mind, too, that we have just changed our pay plan, and everybody was very kindly given an increase in 2022 once that plan was done, and we will continue to offer them their merit increases of up to that 4% as a recommendation.
If everybody's on average is getting 3.7%, if we have job expectations and they meet those expectations and they're getting 3.7 merit increase, that it should be above what the expectations are that earns a merit increase.
Yep, and we see a lot of scoring that exceeds expectation idea within their reviews. So you basically go from not exceeding any expectations to meeting expectations, and there's always a pretty good mix of the meets expectation and exceeds expectation, but then that's calculated based on the score, and that's how we come up with that average of about 3.7%. I can tell you that there are plenty of folks who are getting above that 3.7% as well.
I feel like he was asking, doesn't it start to feel more automatic that you meet expectations, you get 3.5, you exceed, you get 3.7? I mean, are we expecting too little for the merit bonuses?
I would say there's a cost of living embedded within the merit increase, and we're maintaining what is competitive, to your point, with enough variance between exceeds and meets, I think is what I'm hearing. That's something that we are reviewing and assessing.
Yeah, cost of living in a normal salary increase are kind of automatic, but if you meet expectations, I don't think you should get a merit increase.
Yeah, mixing cost of living with merit is a little funky. You know, it makes it automatic,
And that is something
whether
with
you're
being
performing or not.
right, in Aspen that we're looking at. It's still industry standard, and it still meets our highly competitive total compensation philosophy. I would say our focus has been on pay ranges and moving individuals to have competitive pay and to recruit and retain, mainly retain staff with our turnover. It's a philosophical conversation too, and this is what we've done historically. I would say in the future, it's something that is on our radar that we would assess.
So in addition to that, as I mentioned, we did just kind of relaunch our new compensation plan in April of '22. And to remain competitive, we are looking at what movement that plan could have overall in 2023. Again, we'll be looking at market data, both locally, regionally, statewide, and nationally, to see where movement really is to remain competitive in the market. So we will have more information on that as we sort of review what's happening between now and the end of the year. We also have a recommendation for our North Star incentive. So this is formerly our Goals and Outcomes program, and we'd like to keep that consistent with 2022 at $1,000. We feel that that's a good measure and sort of an industry-leading practice in terms of dollars and cents to incentivize staff to take part in these work plan projects and really sort of envelop themselves in what their departments are doing and the city as a whole.
You'll hear more about the North Star program
Yeah,
with Patrick later on tonight.
Additionally, we are always looking at the housing situation here. I don't think this is a secret to any of us that there is a bit of a housing crunch in our community and in our valley. And of course, we would like to do all that we can to house our workforce to help them stay here. So I know that there is an upcoming council work session on 8/2, and so at that time, we'll be presenting some solutions, hopefully, or recommended solutions on what our employer-sponsored housing program can look like. I don't know if you have anything to add to that from.
More to come.
More to come. Our last item, and this is very exciting as well, because this is something that we were sort of coupling with our compensation and classification study as sort of a secondary part of the project, our rewards and recognition enhancements. So in recent years, we've had a program in place that follows what we all know to be sort of a trail map, if there's skiers here. And so those have been an Après Award, a Green Circle Award, a Blue Square, and a Black Diamond. Black Diamond has been on pause due to the pandemic, and we wanted to make new enhancements to that. But the remainder of the program has been in place, and there is monetary value applied to each one of those awards. The Après Award is for work that is sort of within your normal job duties, but a little above and beyond. And then as you go up to the Green Circle and the Blue Square, the criteria does change. It is values-based. So on our 4 core values, what we're looking for when somebody's nominated for an award is that they have exhibited one of those core values and modeled that behavior within their normal job duties and have gone a little further above and beyond. So we are just about at the finish line of that project and looking to enhance the monetary values and the meaningful idea behind each of these awards. So we will be hopefully relaunching that come late July, but then, of course, looking at for what we can do in 2023 to make sure that that is a big part of our total compensation philosophy for our staff.
So in summation, looking at these different bullet points, it really calls out the pillars of our total compensation philosophy and how we're trying to be highly competitive, innovative, and implement best practices within our strategy.
We have a fantastic workforce, and we want to do what's in their best interest.
Totally.
We agree.
Thank you.
Any other question, any more on this presentation? I mean, we're going to get into North Star stuff in a moment, but any other council member comments, questions?
I just want to, Pete, just kind of big picture, I see us projecting for the cool off, but, we're all kind of asking the question of recession, if, when, and so, kind of where on that spectrum of general market decline are we projecting at?
I haven't given us a firm landing spot. I'm kind of like the feds. I'm trying to do this soft landing, but I'm not so hopeful, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I do think that, as the borrowing market is really tightening up with inflation, interest rates going up, I think it does change everybody's dynamic a bit. Obviously not somebody buying the, $20, $30 million house with cash, but the rest of us, right? And so I do think there's going to be some economic impacts to that, and it will dampen some activity. I've already heard that advanced bookings are definitely starting to trend a little bit soft. You probably know that as well.
Correct.
So that just gives me some of those leading indicators that things are definitely out there. How bad it is really always the hardest question to answer, right? Yeah. You don't know how deep anything's going to be. We thought this last one where you totally shut down the economy was going to have this massive impact and a slow recovery, and boy, were we wrong. It rebounded and kept going, and it was a total V-shaped recovery. So I want to give you an answer. I don't have a real firm one right now.
It's okay.
So I need a little bit more on data and to see how the feds keep moving a little bit. They've kind of tipped their hand a little bit of where they're going to go on the next meeting, but.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I don't expect to have a crystal ball, but I always really appreciate, from my perspective, you focus on the conservative side of things. And I think especially now when we've got the memory of being so hot, just being sort of extra conservative in your projections for us so that, hopefully we can make alterations as needed ahead of time and then celebrate not having to execute them rather than having to have the meeting of, oh crap, now what do we cut? So I look forward to you continuing that.
And I appreciate that. And you're right. I definitely lean on the conservative side. And I also think we have some strong reserves right now.
Yeah.
And so, we do have some built-in cushion ready for us if we need it, so we don't have to take drastic measures. But that still doesn't mean we want to, not plan for starting off slow and making sure we don't go too far.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I want to keep this conversation in mind tomorrow night when we have a couple of items on the consent calendar to consider.
Yeah.
So I had a couple items just on the HR and compensation plan stuff. I think that might be helpful for us. Some comparative municipalities, including Pickens County, just for information for us about what our policies are, what are other people doing, both locally is number one, but also if there's industry measures or targets for administrative costs, labor costs for an organization like ours. It'd be interesting to know. I don't know what those are set at. I was, and so the comparatives, I'm talking about like different items throughout the compensation plan, just to see what others do. We've had some discussions over the last year about our PTO and refining that. I was lucky enough to have lengthy conversations with you to discuss this and get a better grasp on it than I'd really hoped to. But through that, through that, there's still that issue of the fact that our accumulations are pretty much at a level that you could never fully realize them. And whether that's cash out or utilization of them. So I think at some point we need to have some kind of further discussion about that. Maybe that's a program that by its very nature is set up that way, and what I did learn from you all is that we have, again, a very comparable and competitive PTO program. We are neither on the overly generous side nor on the minimum side, but nonetheless, just for future conversation, because we ran into that a few times. I'd be interested in, again, through those kind of standards, targets, and measures for municipalities, of what our percentage of our organizational budget is going towards our labor resources. And with that also, what are the trend lines there? As we make changes to our compensation strategy, what are we seeing? Where's it going? Let's play it out a couple years and see a little bit more what that looks like. And that means both number of employees as well as the compensation plan that we have. And then the last thing that I have here is that I'd be interested to know, in the workforce shortage and difficulties that we've seen, what has the impact been of open positions on both our budget and our actual expenses, but what were the other ramifications? For example, if we didn't have somebody fulfilling a role, how was that role absorbed by the people that we do have, with or without compensation for kind of absorbing that workload? But also, again, as we look to fill those positions, where is that balance that we're going to be striking in the future? So what are our trend lines as we move forward? Those are some of the requests I'd have for you for more information so I can understand this stuff better.
Yeah, Tori, I appreciate you bringing that forward. And while it's fairly ambiguous out there, I'd like to ask same lines of where do we need to move the salaries to be able to have the ARC fully staffed? And if we're not able to operate at the same hours, how should we lower the cost of the ARC pass? Or how should that be adjusted for the public because they're not able to access that facility? I know we're making tough choices now, as we should, and thinking about the children and school programs and things like that. But for a lot of adults who buy the ARC pass, when you work Monday through Friday and then it's closed on the weekend, it's like, why am I buying a pass? So that's just one kind of example, I believe, of how the housing shortage is affecting our hiring, affecting wages, affecting the ability to deliver services. It's just a tail onto your question and perhaps an easier example.
Yeah, and to that point, I can speak to that just very briefly. We spent a lot of time with all of you about our full-time compensation plan, but I can tell you, especially based on the ARC, that we did take a very strong look at our, what we call our SIT plan, our seasonal, intermittent, and temporary compensation plan this year to up the wages and increase based on competitiveness within our area for jobs like our rec center and such. And I understand the balance of it not being open on the weekends, and all of your points are very valid about folks wanting to utilize. We are starting to staff up a little bit more, which is great, so we hope to see a change there soon. I can't commit to anything, but we did definitely look at that. So just something we haven't spent a lot of time on with you all.
Yeah, okay, well, again, I just want to make sure we're not shortchanging us by telling us the bad news about wages, and we're not shortchanging the community in their expectations when they're buying services from us.
Definitely.
Yeah, and on that staffing level, I know we see it across the board in all kinds of different, Pete, you mentioned the buses are full now. I mean, we have rolling stock sitting because we don't have enough drivers, because we don't have housing. We can't have ARC open all the time because we can't find people. We don't have the bar at the Wheeler Opera House open. If you can't find somebody, paying them more doesn't help if you don't have somebody to pay. So they all dovetail into each other. I would say the bottom line of them all is housing.
Yep.
You know, and I agree with that, Ward. You're absolutely right, but sometimes we're losing people because they just got their new lease and it just went up 200%. And money does make a difference to people whose expenses are just going up as to whether they decide to give up finally or they decide to stay one more year.
Yeah, our expenses for salary decreases when we have open staff. So if you're not fully staffed, and I think that the review that you've just showed us is that we're very competitive in our total compensation.
Yeah.
But, yeah, you save money on salary expenses when you can't fully staff.
And so maybe to dovetail off that a little bit, for just maybe anecdotal information, further conversation at some other time, is the relationship between wages, housing, benefit packages, workplace satisfaction when it comes to retention and recruitment. I mean, those are all part of the bigger conversation. So, you know, anything you can do to give us insight is helpful.
A part of that in the upcoming work session, I think it's finished, I think it's closed now, but we're gathering data on a customized, it's our Office Vibe Pulse Survey employee engagement tool, where we surveyed all of our employees and asked specifically housing, their housing satisfaction, some of their housing pain points. So we hope to utilize, we are using that data in preparation for housing solutions. There's no magic wand. There's only so many options, so much we can do, but it's a starting point, and it will correlate with the survey information.
We also asked similar questions in the creation of our new compensation plan about a year ago, so we'll do a comparison of that data.
I just want to toss this in, since we have two APSHA representatives here, is this was brought up during the lumberyard discussion recently, that some of our APSHA, I think aiming at that 30% of your income for housing, that some of the lower categories are higher percentage than the higher categories. So it seems like we should try to level that out so that instead of somebody at a higher category paying less of a percentage of their total income, that the lower end should go down and the upper end go up.
The pricing of the rentals is actually set by this board, not APSHA, when you get down to it. You know, they manage them for us, but based on what we set as rates. And my understanding, it's 30% of income across the board, and it doesn't go down for higher earners. That's why, you know, if you're in a Category 4 renter, you're going to pay more than a Category 3 or Category 2. The issue you might be somewhat involved with is the cost of living increase that was allowed for the units, which we all approved because people all got raises and suddenly no one qualified. And you're saying, do we ask this cohort of 25% of our tenants to move out to nowhere because they got a raise? And so we did raise the amount of income you were able to have and stay in those units, but I thought they were also adjusting the rent as well to acknowledge the fact that they are over the income cap. But that, we can double check that with Matthew.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would just love to have staff double check that, because my recollection on the first point is different and the second point the same, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Who's
All right.
correct.
Follow up on
But Ward, to your point, if that is the case, I would agree.
Corrected,
Yeah.
yeah. Agreed.
I'm not sure, maybe this helps, but I think Ward might have been talking about the width of the categories is so
broad.
wide that
Okay.
if you're on the low end versus the high end of that specific category, you're paying different percentages of your total income.
That's true, and, you know, it's so, as you know, it's so hard to make regs perfect, because there's always somebody on one side of the line or the other, but if you make very nice, tight categories, you're suddenly going to have vacancies, because I don't have somebody who makes exactly this much in the middle, or somebody is now bumped up from, you know, how many categories do you get up to? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you know, and we don't have units for G. We just, once you get earning a little more, you're kind of out of here. But I do know what you're saying. There's a width, and that's why the city used to try to put its for sale units kind of some in the middle of the range and some at the low end of the range, not necessarily the top selling price that they could.
I'll go back through my notes and try to,
Nail down on
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, we definitely want to
Yours.
follow up on it.
Thank you guys for your part of this. You're going to stick with us because you're involved in the next. I just want to say real quickly, you guys have done a great job over the last couple of years. We've really elevated the expectations and kind of the game that you are bringing to the city as an organization. I just want to say thank you because this discussion is much more elevated around this topic than it has been for, I think, many years. And so, and really you two have been kind of driving a lot of that, working with Pete's office, of course, but I just want to say thank you because it's not easy, some of this work that you've been doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. We have one other thing that we need to talk about with Pete. And that is the ballot question. Over the last week or so, there have been members of the public that have had different conversations and put forth some suggestions or some questions around the ballot questions coming for the short-term rental taxes. And they've caught some of our ear, but it needed to be a conversation that we just had at this table together. So to kick it off with that as an introduction to this, again, this is for polling information. And what started is coming forward with a question from one of our condotel operators about the equity in our approach to what ended up being kind of a majority supporting the 13.1% taxation on short-term rentals. It grew into a conversation about the different types of short-term rentals that there are. So it was put forth that maybe there is a better and more equitable way to spread these taxations across the different types of units. With that being said, Pete I think has maybe some background information, but really this is just coming to us to say, do we want to give direction for Pete to figure out how to incorporate a question or two or whatever it is to find out the public's take on this item? So let's start with, can you talk about the baseline?
Yes.
Okay,
Let me, if I may, share my screen.
thank you.
Thanks for the introduction and a quick heads up. So just to make sure, I'm sorry, it's small, by the way, but just a recap of kind of where we're at just today, right? We really, as a city, have two taxes. We have our sales tax and we have our lodging tax. So that in total is 4.4%. There are other jurisdictions, though, that lay over top of all of us, right? And so we have other Pickens County tax, we have the state tax, we have the transit tax. So when you start putting all of those things together, it's not just our own 4.4, it becomes 9.3 on a normal retail transaction, or if you're at a lodging establishment, it's 11.3%. That's where we're at today, okay? This is something that I did not include when I went and provided the council with what are the other communities doing with their STR tax. I didn't layer in all their other taxes on top of their STR tax. So I was trying to do apples to apples before, but in terms of just where we're at today. So there's, as the mayor had mentioned, there's an opportunity to maybe look more broadly than just the STR community to help try to mitigate some of the impacts of the increased tourism. One of those options could be looking at all lodging, the entire lodging sector, not just the STR lodging sector, to try to spread some of the revenue generation to help with the mitigation process. So right now, that top table tells you that basically for every 1% of taxation on the nightly stays at all lodges across the board, including STRs, but also including the Jerome or the W or anything else, you basically generate about $2 million, okay? Every 1% on just the STR community is about 800,000. I'm just using round numbers from my last slide deck. So hypothetically, we could go and say, okay, let's increase we already have a 2% lodging tax. We could create a new tax that would tax tourism and basically increase that by another 3% across that same base. So all lodges, including the Jerome, the W, the Linnell, and the STRs, and in the dispersed residential community or the condotels. If we did 3% on that base, we would generate an additional $6 million. And then if there was an appetite to say, well, maybe STRs, again, still operate a little bit different from the rest of that traditional lodging sector. They still don't have that same assessed valuation applied to their property tax, for instance. Maybe there's an additional delta that should be charged to those environments. That could be another 5%. This is all hypothetical. That would generate another $4 million. So the combination of that would be $10 million more in tax revenue, which is roughly the same dollar amount as what we talked about on a 13% tax on just the STR community. Am I making sense? I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm just trying to give you a hypothetical.
Just so I understand.
Yep.
What you're saying is, rather than the initially sort of targeted for feedback, 13.1% exclusively for STR as a means of sharing the burden, so to speak, if we, instead of 13.1 and the existing 4.4 went to 7.4 and 12.4, we would end up at roughly the same revenue.
That's correct.
I understand.
Where it comes into play is the delta on taxation between a traditional lodge and a short-term rental lodge may not be quite as disparate, is that the right word? That far apart as opposed to under this type of a scenario. You can see on the bottom chart, layering in all those other jurisdictions' taxes, that would be the actual tax rates of 14.3 and 19.3 under this hypothetical scenario. Graphically, because everybody likes graphs.
Oh, golly gee.
We're right now at the bottom end of this spectrum, right? We're right now taxing 2% on lodging. So under this, you would potentially move the traditional lodges up to 5% for that same tax, roughly, or you'd move the STR from 2% up to 10%. And that's kind of how it then slots relative to those blue bars, which were the other communities that we kind of had previously benchmarked against. And then also shows where the 13.1 was that we originally started with. So just putting all of that out there as a response to some of the feedback that we've been receiving since our last conversation.
And again, this is for ballot polling reasons, right?
Yes.
If this is intriguing to council and council thinks that this has an equity to it.
Well, you got to put it back up.
Oh,
If you're
I
going to
didn't-
take a look at it.
You really want to look at it again, huh? Absolutely.
Secret.
So again, the question is really about polling questions, and we don't have to formulate it. Pete would say, okay, if we want to find out what the community feels about this, we'll figure out how to ask those questions.
This is strictly for context.
Right. I just have a question on the slide, because I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
really understand it. We've been going back and forth about talking about what someone's tax is all in, including everything that's a sales tax. And then now this is back to just talking about the lodging tax.
Yep.
So it's very hard for me to look at this and say, well, what is the rest of Telluride, or what is the rest of the Crested Butte tax? I mean, what is it, because, I mean, we saw Ouray up there 25% before, so their lodging only is around this 15%.
Yeah, it would take me a bit of work to really find out every
I
state's
know, and I don't really
overlay,
want
every
you to have to
county's
do that.
overlay,
I just wanted to, because now, as we're looking at this chart, we're also not seeing what the all-in would be in Aspen lodging, if any of these methods were taken.
Yeah, this is really the only way I could do the comparison between other communities.
Right, right.
But
But we could add, what would it be, another 7% on at the bottom of any of those numbers, and it would equal the total Aspen sales tax or something like that?
Yeah, well, so this does give you with the Aspen totals, so that, I mean, that's under the hypothetical. If you had the 13%, yes, you would add the other 7, is that right? 7?
Yeah. Okay.
So just to add to the conversation here, you know, for me, when I think about this, is I think about the impacts from the different properties. So for example, when we talk about that single-family home that's in a neighborhood, not necessarily next to transit, not even, you know, so maybe not in the core, where core services, whether it's transit or police, you know, are more present, everything. So for me, I think about this, when this came up, I was like, well, I do feel like those farther flung STRs, they do, I think, have greater impact. Greater impact on the neighborhoods, greater impact on the issues of our community and such. So I get this. I don't know how you would structure it for a question and polling. I don't know. But I'm interested if this is something that would have, that would have community support. And I recognize that this is kind of the first time we've really talked about this or seen this like this. So again, I'm interested in finding out what the community thinks about it. But Skippy.
So obviously, first blush reactions were just getting this, or I'm just getting it. I don't know if anyone else got it before I did. I can certainly appreciate, I don't know who brought this idea forward, but I could certainly understand why certain groups in the community would bring such an idea forward, and I can understand the desire to sort of spread the burden. That said, this just doesn't make a lot of sense to me for a number of reasons, right? First, just the practical. As you said, there's sort of different impacts that we're trying to address in an STR. If you think about even our nexus going into where these numbers came from around affordable housing and employee use, et cetera, they're based on a residential calculation. They're not based on the lodge. The lodge, when it was developed, went through a land use process that mitigated for its use as a lodge in most cases, unless it was really old. And so it feels like we're taking a specifically designed bucket for over here and just in the sake of fairness, applying it in a way that there isn't a nexus over there. That aside, electorally, I think we're creating a second large group that would have financial basis to oppose it. And I think we're doing it for less than 1% on the STR, and we've already said we're not married to that number. So if the community's pushback is just 13.1% is too high, I think we're going to learn that and we could lower it. But this feels like maybe a well-intentioned attempt at spreading the burden that doesn't actually meet the reason why we got here in the first place.
I'll speak in response just because I want to have discussion around it.
Yeah.
So I don't know that necessarily this is an attempt to spread it about. It's actually maybe an attempt to get more separation between the types that are out there. So yeah, it's the approach I don't think is necessarily about sharing the load. It's really about appropriate impact taxation to address those impacts. As far as what you say about the potential for a ballot question and maybe having more opposition from this, again, this is a polling.
Yeah.
It's a polling opportunity.
That's an assumption, and it could be wrong.
So I'm.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I could be totally wrong about that, and that's what polling's for. That's fine.
I don't know.
I appreciate the conversation, and I'm willing to look at different alternatives. I was describing, obviously at CML, we had a few people saying, you guys thinking about 13%? I'm sure we all heard that. But I was discussing our last work session with Mick Ireland, and how part of that was looking to equalize the difference between a commercial property tax and a residential property tax that being used as a commercial. And I'm not saying it's here nor there, but he said he thought that he wasn't sure we really equalized it the right way, because were we taking the assessed value of the short-term rentals that are residential rate and then going up by the assessed value. So, and his point was, it's not as if you would really want to try to equalize that through a tax measure, but just so when you have the campaign, you can stress how little is really being put in that should be put into property tax, which is our infrastructure, and that's why the tax is equalizing it or helping to. I thought, well, if it's a good support argument, I'd love to have those numbers, but I think it's an awful lot of research at the assessors. The thing that strikes me is that part of this was about leveling the playing field, and I don't know that it levels the playing field to do it this way. The other thing that really strikes me is that, we've had a lot of great technical working group people who have the condo hotels or the existing Gants and things like that. And I don't think that this was kind of tested through them at all, that part of trying to capture STRs paying their fair share in the community as a once residential, now hotel use, that they would also be asked to increase their taxes too. I just don't know. It's not quite the same as saying, are we bringing in a new opposition group, or is it this, again, a little unexpected turn for people when we were trying to say, hi, isn't this an unfair competitive advantage to be able to rent a room as opposed to the cost of operating a lodge and the human safety and all the other services that come with it. So, I'd love to find a way to have as low as we possibly can. And, it's come up before that you could turn a a Chamber of Commerce type of 2% tax into other community uses now if you needed it, and if you ask your voters to do so. You kind of ask, well, is there any other money in the tree? Is there any other money, in that existing tree that should be looked at? I've asked about the school mill levy, because there's some legislation that was asking school districts to keep measuring their mill levy, and that raises the question, does the city of Aspen need to renew the sales tax question for the schools in the future? Or is that truly accomplished, or could be accomplished by their own resources? And, we're doing sales tax into the school district. Our partners at the county doing something into the school district too at a comparable level? I don't know. I think we need to continue to be able to, and we know we can, but we're not seeing it at this time, the case for all the underfunded infrastructure that runs all of these resorts. And that's what it's really coming down to, is the bottom line. We have sewer systems or storm drainage systems that are failing, and you can see the streets coming in underneath them. We have an electrification that's coming forward. We have an older electric system, delivery system, that needs to be rebuilt throughout the downtown. We have mall rebuildings that have to be done throughout downtown. So this is more about the fact that there is not a property tax equivalent now, with residential property taxes never pay their own cost of service. It always comes from commercial. And now we have new commercial elements that are paying that residential property tax rate that doesn't catch up on infrastructure. And so I guess like to kind of keep it back to the purposes that we had tried to identify this for, as opposed to saying, hey, we've had great community partners in our existing traditional lodging, and to solve the short-term rental new impact of visitation and demand, we'd like those traditional lodging partners to collect more too. It starts to get awkward.
Yeah, we used to talk about hotbeds. Now we're differentiating between what we're calling short-term rentals, but the hotel sector and the condo hotel, STR residential evidently are about 50%, that each of them account for about 50% of the lodging hotbeds. And what we're doing with this proposal as it stands now is we're taking 50% of the available hotbeds, rooms, tourist accommodations, and we're taxing them to mitigate the impacts of basically of tourists. And if we just take the property tax part of it out right now, just so we can discuss the hotbed part, if we are mitigating, somebody staying at the Jerome Hotel has impacts on the employee generation, as does somebody staying in a home in the West End, let's say. As it is now, as we're thinking of a 13%, you're taking somebody in the, let's use Aspen Alps, for example. You're looking at a 2-bedroom Aspen Alps. You're going to tax them an additional 13%. And a 2-bedroom at the Limelight or Hotel Jerome doesn't have that 13%. So you're creating an inequity by taxing one side but not the other. So the argument that I heard on an inequity side that made sense to me was that if you have your hotbeds split 50-50 on short-term rentals versus hotels, if you take what our targeted mitigation is for the impacts that the tourists are causing, and collect that equally amongst all of them, then in essence what you're doing is you're instead of a 7% increase, you're doing a 3.5% increase for all of the hotbeds. You're creating the same amount of revenue, but you're spreading it over a larger base. And the equity, to me, seems, I think that there is equity there. The argument that when a lodge or hotel is built is that it creates workforce housing mitigation. Well, a lot of the Alps and the Gant and North and Nell and Aspen Square were built before there was mitigation. So I think it makes sense. It makes sense to me to correct. You target, what were we targeting? 25 to 50%. If it was 100%, it was going to be something like 19%. And this, what we were targeting is trying to capture the mitigation that the housing was creating. I don't remember the exact numbers. I know it's probably on the top of your head, Pete. But we thought that if we mitigate 100%, it's just going to be too onerous, and that it's going to create too much of a burden. And if you, so if we targeted a number that we want to capture 25% of the mitigation through a tax, if you double the base for that number, you're decreasing the rate by half. Mm-hmm. So instead of having an additional 7% for 50% of the lodging or hotbeds, you're creating a 3.5% for 100% of the hotbeds. And to me, you're getting at the same place for revenue generation, but it seems to be equal, more equity to that.
I just can't agree, Ward. I can't use the hotbeds analogy. Residential homes were built to be residential homes, potentially to even house workers 20 years ago. They were not built as hotels. And, the county's not going to be asking for any STR tax at all. maybe we don't need to either. You know, maybe this is good, it's just all more beds. And we can let every residence in Aspen have a permit, and it can all be hot beds, and we'll have more tourism than we know what to do with. I mean, that's how I'm looking at it. I see lodges that is built at the base of the mountain as being tourist accommodations. I see homes up Independence Pass as being residents, and I think they will take far more service. The police calls up there for late night parties is not the same as having a hotel manager on site at the Gant saying, you guys are too loud, and there's a bellman who knocks on your door at 11 o'clock.
With respect, Rachel.
I know, Board, I don't see this all as a matter of hot beds. And if it is, then I don't see any reason to limit. We could have a 2% tax if all our beds were hot beds, and then we'd have hot beds everywhere, and we'd have lots of revenue. This has been about equalizing an unfair situation where there's a lodge across the street that is paying a commercial property tax, and there's one that's not.
I
And there's a
preface all my comments about taking that part of the property
I
tax
know,
out
and
of the equation.
that's why I don't agree with that approach.
But
And-
if you take that out of the equation, and let's just leave that alone for now. If you're looking at trying to, you're taking a 5.4% as a base across the board for residential, and trying to create equity from a state property tax by a local sales tax in essence. But what I was liking.
Again, I really just don't agree. If the issue is that short-term rentals are unmitigated impacts on all of our infrastructure, how do we even begin to equalize that is what I need to see. If we're just saying, I did not go into the moratorium or the STR discussion or anything else saying our problem is our lodging tax for the existing lodging is too low.
That's right.
I mean, that would have been a very different discussion. We could have started right there and said, how high should the lodging tax be, and gone in and asked all the lodges for it. And then, again, whatever STRs are out there can pay that higher lodging tax, and that would be that. I
Okay,
mean, if that's where we need to start over again, and that's fine. As I've said before, we don't have to ask that this November. March 23 might make a lot more time to let this sort itself out, see if there's a recession, do anything else. But right now, I don't see saying that my work over the past 6 months has been about how do we raise the lodging tax on traditional lodging that's always followed the rules, that didn't not get their permit for years until we started a tracking system and everything else.
So, again, this is about a polling question. I think we all have a different take on maybe applying it and what we'd want individually, but this is a question that will go to the voters. So again, I'm looking for your support of asking these different kind of questions to the community during the survey and the polling. That's what we're looking for. You may not agree with what he just said about that approach, but that's not necessarily the approach that Pete's going to go. Pete's questions will be around that, if there's a desire for a separation or not.
Whatever questions we need to ask to try to get better public feedback, I'm all down with.
Yeah, and I understand your approach, in different ways, and I think we're all having, this is tough because these are different properties. They are, and there's different impacts from the different properties. So we're all trying to figure out something that is easy to apply, number one, and not be too convoluted in a question, but also has the direct impacts being met by those that need to be accountable for them. Skippy?
Yeah, and I just want to say, I don't think, I haven't heard anyone say that we're all very aligned in addressing this problem, right? So I don't think that anyone wants to pull back from a potential tax or wait. We were all really clear on that. We may have some different stuff to work out, but I don't even want to inject that into the conversation because I think we all want to move forward. And I know that you do, Rachel, as well as I do. I'll answer that question directly, but just one point, Ward, to what you were saying. I would challenge the characterization that adding an STR tax without an additional lodging tax is creating an inequity. I think we have an existing inequity, and so we're balancing that with the STR tax.
And you're seeing that the inequity is the property tax or other taxes besides that?
I think it's a yes and, right? I mean, there's a different property tax for residential and commercial. There were historically different mitigation rates, different fees, et cetera. And to Rachel's point, now they're both operating as commercial, and so we need to find a mechanism, and it may be an imperfect mechanism, but we're looking for that. So that said, to answer your question directly, I'm not interested in testing this only because it would be very hard for me to support it without like a 100-0. But that said, I want us all to get to yes. So if it's important to others to have this on, for you to be able to say you've explored it and do that, that's fine with me.
Thank you for that. In your first comments, I just want to recognize that there's that gray area. These units that we're talking about, because there's a mix of them, they are not all either residential or commercial. So those
Yeah,
those
for sure.
condos, which are delineated as residential, operate as commercial.
For sure.
So
And-
there's gray area in it.
For sure, and in the previous conversation to that reality, I had asked Pete, and I think many of us did, if we could kind of segment them out, and the answer was like, it doesn't really work that way, but we're kind of getting at it in the baseline number of assumptions, and so now I understand this is coming back in a different way, but I don't think it's a way that makes sense to me.
Thank you. Again, just for polling purposes, because Pete's got a life to live, we need to send him off on the road. John, I need your input. Do you want to ask, do you want to give him the ability to include a question that speaks to this discussion?
Well, my main concern is equity. I, don't want to be unfair to any of these subgroups that are just coming to the forefront now that we weren't really focused on in the beginning. I will leave that up to Pete to bring us back those numbers and how that's going to work, but
Get as good information as you can.
exactly.
We want success and we want information.
But, I think, again, our main goal, as has been stated already, was to level the playing field between short-term rentals and our existing lodging. And this is an important first step.
Well, our primary goal is to mitigate for the impacts of the short-term rentals. That's our primary objective here, I would
Well,
say.
with the tax, with the STR overall, it's about the quality of the neighborhoods and the future residents at all.
All right,
Sounds like I can draft some questions to include testing how broad of a base we should be looking at potentially.
like that,
Okay,
yeah.
excellent. Thank you for the feedback.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
All right, next items coming up is North Star Program Overview. We've got Patrick Quick here with us and some support in the back of the room. Oh, she's coming up again. And Andrew, we'd be remiss if we didn't recognize you and the work that you do in this whole thing. So we appreciate you, and your work has been noticeable here over the last few years, and we really appreciate what you've brought to the table for us. Thank you so
Here.
much.
Thank you. Ward, did you feel heard on that? Like, you said what you needed to say?
Well,
He's great.
Yeah, I
I'm
know.
not sure that a
Paid to
local
say that.
tax is a way to make property taxes equal.
And without talking about that a whole much, I would agree.
I just ask that we have enough and appropriate discussion on that so that we are heading towards success collectively. I don't want to be heading somewhere where you two are already not there. And I need to understand why.
I expressed my desire too, is that we're trying to mitigate for the impact of the that are being caused to the community. And we have a dollar number or percentage number that we're looking at to collect for, and how we get at it is just a matter of nuance. To some.
All right, item number 2.
I think we're waiting for Rachel still, right? No?
Did she say wait for me?
She's right there.
That's great. You can go ahead and start introducing. It'll be fine.
Mr. Mayor, Council, good to be here this afternoon. My name is Patrick Quick. I'm the Strategy and Innovation Director. And I am here to talk to you today about a new program called the North Star Program. It is an organizational planning program, including strategic planning and operations planning. And really the kind of thrust of this conversation, to give you a summary of this, is due to upcoming presentations in August for budget presentations. So you'll see some changes for this year on some of those slide decks from departments. And you'll also hear some different language from departments as well, as they're approaching planning in a new way in conjunction with their budget and resource requirements. So new terminology, new approach, so just wanted you to have that context ahead of those meetings. So on the docket today is the Strategy and Innovation Office mission statement. We are a new office, fully formed in August of last year at my hire. So I believe that just a simple overview of what we do will be helpful to you. And then talking about answering a few questions like, what's the point of organizational, strategic, and operations planning? What is this North Star program all about? What is a compass plan, which is a part of the North Star program? And then what are drivers? And I think if we walk away having a good understanding of answering those questions, you'll be on your way for the budget presentations in August.
If I may clarify, a revised, enhanced department. Previously, it was quality management, if you remember Karen Harrington, just to clarify that.
Yes, thank you. So the former quality office.
Oh, wait. If you'll just go back to that last slide.
Yeah.
Just want you to hold that. And I know it's in our packet here, but if you'll just hold that last slide, because I want Rachel to see that introduction that you.
Sure.
No problem. He was just introducing what we're doing here in general, but then brought up this agenda. And it is in our packet, but I just wanted to make sure that you saw this so that it prefaces the rest of the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, so I promise this is the only slide I will read you verbatim, but we did really approach this as a team and as an office with a lot of intention, being a new office, to make sure that we've captured all of what we do as an office. And that is to provide collaborative consulting services, champion a culture of continuous improvement and high performance, promote strategic alignment, foster best practices and organizational excellence, and to encourage employees to embrace change and innovation. And that is a mouthful, but our focus from this mission statement, I hope their takeaway is that we are an office of internal management consultants. And so essentially we're wanting to help departments get better, increasing efficiency and effectiveness. And our kind of focus areas are strategy work, which is the North Star program, amongst a few other items, as well as process improvement work. And that's looking at kind of big picture, community-facing, high-impact processes that affect the community, and taking a look at those, inspecting those, and making sure that we're being customer-focused in our service delivery. And then finally, our systems, and looking at that across systems, across departments and across the organization, and thinking as one organization with our systems, making sure we're getting the most value and bang for our buck in our tools and systems across the organization. Additionally, I should note that we do manage the city's new centralized grants program as well, and we have a grants coordinator in our office as well. And feel free to interject throughout. You don't have to wait till the end if you have questions. So first here, why do we do strategic and operations planning at all? Why is it important? How does it benefit the organization and the community? One is we should probably, well, it's to be proactive and strategic, but I also want to say that it's not city planning. It's not urban planning. So we have a group in ComDev that does a great job in that line of work around development planning, and this is organizational-wide planning, so cross-departmental planning. That includes thinking like vision, mission, values, strategic focus areas, council goals, strategic plan, a future strategic plan, and just overall thinking big picture and planning for the future. One of our goals is to collaborate more across departments. And as I mentioned earlier, thinking of as one organization, what we call systems thinking in our world, and to ultimately to accomplish our goals and community outcomes is another reason we do this planning work. Effective organizational planning is always actionable and measurable. So as we're working with departments on operations planning, we're trying to kind of have them measure for success and also documenting what they're trying to accomplish at a high level, not merely project activity, because that is ultimately what the community cares about, is results and impact. And another reason we do this is to establish one system of record for organizational planning. Right now, we are on our way to doing that right now. But for example, last year we didn't have that. And as a good example to think of is if we all, as departments, did not approach budgeting the same way, and we all did budgeting in a different way, that could create some inefficiencies and frankly chaos. But in organizational planning, same approach, is one kind of way of approaching it and talking about it, and a template to use where they're all planning our project activity in the same way. Another reason you do it is to enable multi-year planning. So we're typically used to planning in organizations, especially governments, on a year-to-year basis with the budget. And what we're trying to do with departments is be a little bit more comprehensive and flexible in our planning to look at years in advance, and then aligning those efforts with the strategic direction of the city. And then we do it to tell our story, or the department's story, effectively, both to the community and internally, based on what we're trying to achieve. We like to, we say a phrase often in SIO, which is never confuse activity with results. And there comes with that results always measuring.
I always like never confuse a circle with direction.
Yeah, it's like the hamster wheel kind of effect. To plan, to organize, to execute our goals and our projects, ultimately to try to move the needle on something. And often what you see in organizations is they will have documented their project activity, but they're not documenting their goals, they're not documenting their measures of success and tracking that progress over time. Ultimately, and I would say our primary goal of this program is to achieve some semblance of alignment, strategic alignment. And what that means is kind of a three-prong approach that we're taking, and that's important to Sarah, which is understanding, collaboration, and accountability. So greater, doing this North Star program to pull departments together on a regular basis to understand what the other departments are doing and how it may impact and affect their work in terms of planning and in terms of resources and budget. Next, collaboration. The more you talk and meet and discuss your priorities and projects as departments, you can collaborate and bounce ideas off of each other. And finally, accountability. Just doing this work creates a system of accountability for the government and establishing what our goals are and our progress towards them. And lastly, just to follow best practices in this line of work. So there's much as there is a right way to do budgeting and a wrong way to do it, there's a right way to do strategy work and a wrong way. So we tried to build in best practices into the North Star program as much as we could and avoid those, what we like to call worst practices, and those pitfalls as much as possible as well. Okay, so finally, what we're here for is, what is this North Star program? So, by now, it's the city's new strategic and operations planning program, kind of playing off that North Star navigational theme, giving us some guidance toward a plan and a strategic direction. And this all started a few months ago. Late last year, we started developing this program as a team, and then we started rolling it out this year into the departments and working with them, seeing sort of how some departments plan and have planned in the past in some ways, and others just frankly hadn't. So meeting the departments where they were and trying to get everyone like on the same page. At this point, everyone has developed a compass or an operations plan, and everyone's approaching it the same way. So we really decided, as you can start with strategic planning or you can start with operations planning. We decided to start at the department level at operations to try to build some buy-in from departments and make it a bit more organic bottom-up program. Also includes quarterly strategy reviews as part of the North Star program. I mentioned earlier those check-ins and discussing their compass plan, which is their operations plan, on a quarterly basis, not just with the strategy office, but also once a year, at least once a year, with the city manager being brought in to those sessions, and then with their cohorts. The peer cohorts are kind of a reimagining of cohorts that they've used in the past, but essentially it's groups of department directors. Typically there's 3 per group, so I think we have 7 or 8 departmental cohorts where we are pulling them together on a quarterly basis to present their plans and to adjust them as necessary. I mentioned this earlier, part of North Star is also strategic planning, but we're not there yet. And this looks like, more organizational citywide, which would involve the community, certainly council, the city manager's office, to build out a comprehensive strategic plan in the future. We'll also include future outcome measurement. Mentioned performance measurement earlier. And this is likely going to be built out more next year. We really tried to just focus on the bare bones of an operations plan, since some departments were so new, this was so new to them. So next year we hope to kind of design intentional performance measures around what they're trying to achieve. And also, in the future, we want to look at some sort of dashboard website. It's common for some cities to do. I came from Austin. We had ATX performance, but essentially it's just a dashboard of the government saying, this is what we're working on, this is what we're trying to achieve, this is how we're measuring it, and here's all the projects and activities cross-functionally across departments that are aligning under these kind of goal areas or outcome areas.
Scooby?
Yeah, just some clarification.
Yeah.
So am I correct in understanding that the North Star program writ large is a new set of process and operational, like systemic standards that take ideas that originate at this table through delivered results for the community in a more effective, efficient, transparent way?
You got it.
Okay, that's great. Super excited about that. I've read what you've done several times. I don't understand how it works. So if you could, and I know it's not implemented today, just conversationally, if we look back at a goal set here 5 years ago, what's the process there, and where are sort of the snags or the things that aren't going great? And 5 years from now, when this is fully implemented, like, what is the vision of how this process works?
Well, I think it's less about how the process would work, but more about like establishing how do you measure success for that goal. Mm-hmm. So sometimes with strategic planning it gets a bad rap because it can be very lofty and wordy and fluffy, right? And so that's why I mentioned like no strategic plan is worth its weight or operations plan really worth its weight without, yes, action, but also measurement in some ways. And so I think that that's where there's room for growth to me, looking at the organization, and is to develop outcome measures with departments, with council, with the community, based on the strategic plan and what we want, like the strategic direction that we're trying to go toward. And we don't have a built-out, right, comprehensive strategic plan as a city today, but in the future, hope to work on that together. I do think that right now, what we have used as kind of a starting point for departments, instead of just tell us what your priorities are, we had them start with like that next level down, like looking at what we're calling drivers, and I'll get to that in a moment, but looking at our strategic focus areas that we do have. We have a city mission statement. We have council goals. We have our values. So looking at that through a lens, and that was the starting point of goal setting with the departments before we just started, planning out projects or brainstorming projects.
And the next pieces of this presentation will speak to your question a little bit and is what gave me clarity. I came to the same place.
I read it all a few times, but I'll wait for follow-ups.
I think I'm kind of with you. There's a lot of bureaucratic language that when you work with it all the time, it makes total sense to you. And if you don't, then it's like, it's elusive.
Yeah, intense, yeah.
Yeah.
So, sorry, just backing up a bit, it's focused on, again, the total compensation package is what we'll get to with the Compass Plan. For council's lens and viewpoint, this is really the city manager looking at our goals and outcomes program, where I view it as employees do X and they receive Y. So a very kind of widget-focused program was my lens, and not strategic or operational. So, something like, I'm making this up, but streets shovels or plows the roads continuously or within an hour of when it snows, something like that. Or HR provides new hire orientation within X period of time. And instead, we're really focused on stretching and becoming operational and strategic. So HR's goal is implement and announce and develop and initiate a new compensation plan. And that ties into being more strategic, and that's really what we wanted to talk to you about today. And this ties into budget requests, because to implement a total compensation plan, you're going to have a budget request. So if there's an additional resources balanced with being fiscally responsible, of course, so if there's an additional FTE or some form of additional monies for a request along with what staff's accomplished, so you're seeing the benefits and what to the community through the departments, through Compass planning. I think that's the relevancy for council and why it's really the focus of our city manager, Sarah, and saying, hey, here's the goals and outcomes program. And we had a department director team come together, and Patrick joined as well. And they kind of blew it up and said, okay, we don't want this program anymore. We want to be more strategic. We want to really provide a benefit to the community through different, multiple ways. And that's what we're here today to really integrate and share with you, because you'll, in preparation for the budget meetings, if that's helpful.
It is.
Great.
And I think that the next two slides here, Skippy, may answer your question a little bit better than I did, I hope.
If I could, Alyssa, for a second. We're talking about total compensation plan, and now we're talking about strategy and innovation office. How do those two, I would think that the TCP would fall under the same type of planning
Let me clarify. That was one example of a milestone or a goal that was on HR's Compass Plan.
Yep.
Something more strategic. Previously, under the Goals and Outcomes Plan, it was train or provide orientation to new hires within 2 business days. Very tactical. And now we're moving to being more operational and more strategic with this, with the Compass Plan and with this program. So those were just examples. I apologize.
Patrick, take us through the drivers, the goals.
Okay. All right, first, let's start with what is a compass plan. So it's the major component of the North Star program. It is at its,
Can you answer one question? Do we name all of these, or are we buying into a national program known as North Star?
it's a customized program. We're taking best practices nationally.
And developing your own program, and you've come up with the naming of it?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank you.
I think first were calling it work planning, or we got to
a
operations
great
planning.
name.
We were this is boring, so we tried to come up with.
It's a great name, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't taken off of a book or something.
Nope.
Got to make it a little sexy.
Right. Okay, so it is, at its root, it's just an operations plan. And we will build it out more and more. But for the purposes of sharing this for context for you for budget presentations, essentially the main components are drivers, goals, projects, and milestones. And the curveball here, I think, is drivers. Most of us know that goals are broad statements of achievement, things we're trying to do in the future. Projects have a start and stop inside of the departments, and milestones are just chunks of progress that we're trying to accomplish in order to complete a project. And so there's a lot more to the compass plan. Each department has a compass plan at this point. There's a lot more than that, but I think that if you just know what those terms are, you will be able to keep up with departments in those meetings as they're kind of throwing out this language. The compass plan, one thing it is not everything that a department does. So it's not going to capture absolutely all of their operations. It's just capturing their high-level priorities where they're expending the most resources, time, staff, money. And then we're coupling that with the budget presentations to where it tells a bit of a story for you and for the community, so that you see that this is what they're trying to achieve at a high level, not just this is what they're doing, if that makes sense. It also mentioned earlier, is there a question?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get this in my mind, that exactly what this is, and it's the drivers. Like, let's say we have a council goal that we want to address greenhouse gas and climate change. So this is not this would require projects to do that. We set the goals. The projects are, they're not going to be tied to just one department.
Right.
So the projects can be multi-departmental.
Yes.
So that the milestones are going to have to be coordinated through those departments.
Yes.
And this is an MO, a modus operandi. It's a way to achieve the goals through projects, and measurables are the milestones.
Yes, and it's documentation of that work so that we can track progress over time. Part of the North Star program I mentioned are these quarterly reviews. So that's the chance to talk about these as departments come together on a quarterly basis, so that they're not just focused on their department day-to-day operations, that they're thinking strategically across the organization and how they can look through the lens of a council goal and say, how do we come together and accomplish this?
And maybe it's safe to say that the reason that we have an office dedicated to this is that across the 22 departments, something like 22 departments, you could have these people located in each department. You could have this as a requirement of department, but that is not the efficient way to go about this for an organization that's our size. You could literally be hiring a strategic specialist in every department, but this not only represents those, but ties them together because of the cross-pollination and cross-work that we get done. Rachel?
Yeah, without stealing anyone's thunder or probably getting it wrong. To me, this is a lot of breaking down silos between departments so that expertise can be shared and sometimes resources that you don't necessarily need the same piece of equipment for 4 different departments if they can share at a regular basis and things like this. And so there's that aspect. And the other thing that this strikes me a lot about is, the town of Aspen that became a city of Aspen really becoming a city of Aspen. And it's a city growing up in its professionalism and its attitudes and how things are managed and how things are done. And it's the way to make a real platform leap from the way things were always done to this is how we'd like to see them done now. And so it's, I think, bringing a different level of professionalism in with someone in a department that will know what's going on in each of the 22 departments. And it's not one department after another, perhaps hiring a consultant to do their department retreat separately and things like that, which is what always usually happens. And, having been around the block more times than I wish to count, there's a different big management philosophy that comes around about every 6 years. And they all have different names and different acronyms and different this and that. And they're all about how do you get alignment between your goals, your resources, and a strategy to take you somewhere in a short period of time. And I see this as being very innovative. I think it's appropriate for Sarah as a manager to realize how much different departments need of some real expertise and not just a 1-hour interview or a 2-hour this or that there can be some real deep dive. So I'm very supportive of it. I think it's good. It is always funky because you're looking at different titles and names for what, it's a renaming and rebirth and reconfiguration. But what I really see behind it is the professionalism and the dedicated of resources to making it happen, as opposed to just saying, here's your instructions for the new computer install. You guys go do it yourself, and I hope we get a good product out of it. This is more about walking through it and seeking that alignment. So I'm okay with it. I think it's really good.
Is this like quality control on steroids?
Well, yeah, there was all these different names over the years. I'd have a hard time remembering them all. I've forgotten different.
It gets its roots from quality management or, TQM.
The name?
No.
They're always evolving. But the one thing I would like to put in is a little bit of a different footnote for you guys to consider. And I'll say I'm hoping this isn't really the case. But I think that we need to kind of look and say, is there anything that should be eliminated? Is there any service that we really will not be in a position to provide in the future, given the shortfalls of staffing and the high unlikelihood that that would be solved anytime in the next couple of decades? I mean, I hate to say that, but are there departments or programs that should be merged, consolidated, eliminated, or we just acknowledge we really cannot provide that at the level we should and call it a city service? Is there anything that should be privatized? I mean, I'm about the last person in the world who would say, let's privatize this, that, or the other thing. But I think we're reaching that point, and I would rather make sure we deliver great services out of 18 or 19 programs than lousy services or half-baked services out of 22. And I don't think we're doing that now, but I think given the recruitment shortfalls, what's happened to the price of free market housing, the ability to pull people in, we need to make sure we have an eye on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate your remarks. I just wanted to, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I know there was a period of time when city government was thought of as an old boys club. I heard that term used many times over many years. And
Feel that old.
anyway, with all due respect to Scott and Jim, I just want to applaud our female city leaders. This is a major step forward, and I think we'll all benefit from this. And I agree with what Rachel said. I'm sure there's some overlap in some departments, some redundancies, and I know we'll get to the bottom of it.
And sometimes it's looking at, I mentioned systems earlier, you can also look at when we become more mature in data collection and reporting, that sharing of information and sharing of services across departments. One thing that I think that this is the strategy component of our work, but there's also the process component and the systems component of our work. And what we're hoping is that in these quarterly sessions that we learn more and more as we learn more about departments and their processes, it will kick up process improvement projects that we can go in and spend time with departments on and help them, and really be that community kind of advocate also, to say, well, we're going to think about this from, if I'm going into this system and, filling out this application, right, and thinking about, well, this is a system that we already use over here, why are we purchasing another system to do the exact same thing? So documenting is really important, I think, on the system side. And that's one thing that we're focused on right now, is to document all the systems across the city, who is using it, who's not using it, who could use it, and sharing that information out with departments at these quarterly sessions as well.
So technology efficiencies.
Okay. Where was I here? Okay, I think we were at, that this is not everything. A compass plan is not everything that a department does. It is capturing their priorities for that year and for future years. It's a multi-year project pipeline, so it's a living plan, and we're building in kind of more course correction into the compass plan, to where it's not, in the past when we have done work planning, it's been, this is our work plan as of January of this year, and that's the work plan for the year. Where these quarterly sessions give us space to say, hold on, let's take a time out from our day-to-day work and take a look at this and see if we need to shift priorities based on community feedback or Sarah's feedback, and reprioritizing projects. Maybe a short-term project that was going to be on the docket for this year is now moved to a midterm next year, and so we've built that into this planning process as well. And lastly, I think this is really important, I hope, and that this is that this occurs in the budget presentations, that it helps departments storytell, tell their story a little bit better, because they're going to be telling you, this is what we're trying to achieve, not this is what we're doing, or this is what we want. And they're all going to be speaking the same language. I apologize, there is like kind of a specific language that we're using here. I'm not trying to get too buzzwordy, but it is important that we're all speaking at least the same language at the very least. There's no right or wrong language, it's just that we need to be all talking about it in the same way. Okay. So drivers, drivers are a part of every compass plan, and they are really the starting point, the baseline to strategy development. So when we went and sat with departments to see where are they at in terms of planning, do they have planning right now, or is this the first time that they're doing it? Really the first initial inspiration that we look at is this. And oftentimes, if you don't make these things actionable, they won't be. They'll just be words on a page that sound nice, but you're not actually putting them into action. So what we're asking departments to do is to say, look at all of these through a lens, and then try to develop your projects based upon it and show that alignment and that strategic kind of thinking, systems thinking. And yeah, I just have in my notes here, departments didn't write, they started with writing their goals first and then developing their projects. And they didn't start developing any goals until they looked at what their drivers and their initial influences for why do we do the work we do to begin with. And so directing them back to our mission and our values and our focus areas. This is not a full list of drivers that you see on the screen. There could be others like, I was here a couple weeks ago talking about the Aspen Community Survey. That could be a potential driver. Hopefully that is using data to make decisions. And a staff survey, we mentioned Office Vibe earlier. Some departments are using that as a driver in some of their goal development and other business process kind of internal data that is used.
And I saw you mentioned in the memo, the Aspen Area Community Plan as a driver. I just want to see that one really recognized and not kind of in the background.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good point. Thank you. You can move to the next. Okay. This is just a summary of kind of what we talked about, just to jog your memory on some of this stuff and all this new language. So what questions do you have for me now?
Skippy.
What's a gauge progress? Gauge progress, how does that work?
Yeah, so in these quarterly strategy reviews, remember it's typically going to be made up of 3 department directors, SIO, and our office, and oftentimes the city manager will join as well. And what we're looking at is, okay, what did we do last quarter? Here's what's changed. Here's the projects that we've made progress on, the milestones that we've achieved. SIO is going to document the milestone achievement and try to communicate those and celebrate those milestone wins out to the organization, which I also think is a really important thing to be able to remind the city or as an organization what we've accomplished, but also to the community.
Got it. So that's a 1, 2, 3. Within those peer cohorts, that's what we're doing, and that's what we do with it. They're not separate things. Okay, understood. I have comments, but no more questions.
So the pure cohorts are not necessarily in the same department?
No, and intentionally not. One thing we got was, hey, can I be in this department, or can this department head be in my cohort because we work together a whole lot? And we were like, no, like intentionally no, because part of the goal of the program is departmental understanding, the left arm understanding more about what the right arm is doing. And even in areas that have nothing to do with their operations day to day, it's still, we see, beneficial for leaders of the organization to get together and be strategic and collaborate and innovate together and creating space for that.
So the SIO is like a collaborator and coordinator.
Facilitator, yes.
Okay, so the projects are established after the goals, or after the drivers have set what the goals are, then the projects are created that might be multi-departmental. And quarterly, they check in with the SIO to see how you're doing on it, what your measurables are. And because like affordable housing and childcare are not limited to 1 year or one department. So this is like we're going to prevent 9/11 because the NSA, CIA, and FBI are going to share information. Yeah.
We're not having another 9/11, are we?
Yes.
Comments?
Comments? Yeah, I'm super excited. I didn't know this was anywhere boiling. Honestly, I think that if this is, I should say, when this is complete in the way we want it and when we've communicated it appropriately to our community, I think this is arguably the second most important thing we can do for our community after affordable housing. I have, for a long time, thought that the breakdown in trust in our democratic process is maybe the most existential threat we face as a country and as a community. I think we're seeing that really acutely right now. 73% of the most recent poll think democracy is truly at risk. That number seems soft. And it can be easy to think of that as something out there, but we don't rebuild that trust in Washington. It'll never happen. We do it here by improving the way we function demonstrating to the community that we do that and having people say, well, hey, in my backyard, this works and it can for you too. So I can't overstate how important I think this work is, and I'm so thankful that we're doing it. I think I understand the process. I'd like to share it back with you as I understand it, which has some of my thinking in it, because I've been thinking about this for a long time. I actually, I think it was 2015 when I first brought a process idea to city staff. I was just a random person at that time, so probably no one listened to me. But I think this is so important. So, what I see is a continuous and transparent process where at this table, we set annual goals. Those goals are then taken by staff and run through those primary drivers, as we're calling it, and they're broken down into measurable outcomes. Those desired measurable outcomes are then spread out to the various departments, and there may be many, who have the potential to influence or work on those goals. They then prioritize based on what's available to them into these projects and milestones. Again, these are things that are measurable. We'll have a community dashboard where the community, and I know it's a future thing, can go on and look at all the things the city's up to. Hey, what are we up to in environmental policy? Oh, here. Oh, there's these 3 projects. That's interesting. This one's halfway along. This one's ahead of schedule. Ooh, this one we're not doing so hot. But they'll get to know that in real time. I hope that we will integrate the public interaction piece into this in a very strong way. I know there's a lot of ways to skin that cat, and I don't see any of that sort of deeper work on that here. But, I imagine, creating some form of a wiki where people can go into those individual projects, maybe using existing things like community voice or polls, but maybe something new. One of the ideas, and this is outside the scope of my understanding, but we've kicked around the idea for a long time of a living AACP. Right? The AACP is supposed to be so central to our community buy-in about where we go, but it kind of gets sitting on the shelf and people forget about it. So what if it sat there and people could make comments on it, suggest areas for changes, and know that that's reviewed on, say, an annual basis, and that their changes are incorporated into it. And then we don't have to look at it as this terrifying 10-year, oh my God, here it comes again, 3-year project, right? Just an example. But people can interact, they can see what's happening in real time. And on the back end, as you've said, we have peer cohorts that are intentionally diverse within the organization that produce stovepiping, that are meeting, tracking progress, and critically, we're really celebrating that. And hopefully we're aligning our complete, what's the word I'm searching for? Compensation package to that. And to what we talked about earlier, I hope much more, right? I hope we're giving people really big bonuses for knocking it out of the park on things, and really driving innovation in those areas and giving people something to be proud of and chase. And of course, as we've said, this is all integrated into that community view. So that's, if any of that is incorrect, please correct me or tell me where any of that is wrong. But if that's where we're headed, I think that's really, really, really important. And I think our area for leveling up here is to communicate this better. Not better, communicate it differently, right? Because we're communicating it really well for the internal audience right now. I'm sure staff understands this. But even if we get this systemically, like process-wise, exactly right, but the community doesn't get it, then we've achieved maybe 5% of what we can. Mm-hmm. Because perception is as important as reality, unfortunately. And we see that in people's perceptions of life in the universe right now. So I think from moment go, we should be seeking to really make this a public effort, like really communicating what we're doing in terms of modernizing our process to meet the needs of the moment and our community, including them in that, and them knowing that a better form of government that is more responsive and more transparent is coming. I think that's so important. So, I'd love to see, even if it's not for public consumption, like, can we get to the point where there's a 1-2 minute animated video where people are like, oh, I get what that is. That makes a ton of sense. And I get how I have agency in that process. And I get how I can trust in that process. And I get how that process works for me. That may be just one tool of kind of how to get that language there. But and I say this with all kindness because I'm so supportive, but like, if I have to read this 4 times to understand it, like, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm digging into the details with you guys a little bit, but I think that public-facing dashboard that's probably the best path. I think that the lazy thing to do, the easy thing to do would be, and an ineffective thing to do would be to just post the compass plans online. But I really don't want us to do that because it's going to be confusing to people. I think what I'd rather do is just organize it by outcomes on a public-facing dashboard. Other cities do this. Some cities do this really well. So there's precedent and models out there that we can use, and organize it by community outcomes and impact and the efforts that we're trying to cross-functionally align to get that done, to move those needles that we're trying to move.
Yeah, I love where we're aiming our North Star, if you will.
And I appreciate what you said about, measuring our goals around like the impact and the influence that we're trying to have, because a lot of times in this work, people say, well, we don't control that, therefore we don't measure it. And I think that if we don't track it, if we don't measure it, then no one will. And if it's important to the community, and we are, organizing our processes and our people and our systems around trying to move the needle on it, we should measure it.
We have to measure what matters, and we know what matters as a community. And like I think someone asked if we were skiers before. I think we all ski. Like, you go where you're looking, right? I mean, if you're spinning a trick, you better look at your landing, because if you don't spot it, you're not going to hit it, right? And so it's just so important that we take ownership of that stuff, and we're not always going to hit it, and that's fine. I think people, the public, will appreciate honesty and candor far more than not. So, yeah, amen.
Look at the space between the trees and not the trees.
Hell yes.
Never look at the trees.
Any other questions or comments?
Congrats and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is get her done, right?
You'll see it in the budget. Oops. You'll see it in the budget presentations.
And what will we see in the budget presentation? Can you preface that?
Yeah, so again, it's not going to be to this level, and you're not going to see full compass plans, but the reason that I wanted you to have at least a little bit more in-depth about the language here is because they may use language around their compass, a driver, or their goals, and I wanted you to have that understanding of what that was and where that's being derived from.
Okay.
We only have about 6 or 8 meetings for talking about the budget coming up.
I hope there's more than that.
Right, numbers.
Don't you shortchange me on budget meetings.
Can I say one last comment? And this is just super, you can totally forget I said this, but I appreciate the theme. I love the North Star. Like, when I think about my own life process, I use the North Star thing too. Compass is great. I get it's a navigational tool, but it's a tool, and I understand the compass plan is actually the roadmap, right? So I just wonder if that might be a more appropriate name.
Maybe, but we're stuck with compass.
Okay, whatever. Like I said, forget what I said.
Change now.
Forget what I said is totally an option.
I hear ya.
I do it all the time.
All right, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Awesome.
We want to thank GrassRoots as usual, and we have a meeting tomorrow here at 5 p.m. We welcome public comment, of course, starting our meeting off at 5, and a great agenda tomorrow, so be sure to tune in.
Action
Must-see TV.
Action
Close that, I guess.
Was that yours? I thought it was mine.
Rachel, I had a question for you.
Yeah.